let's mix some CelluClay.
I'm wearing a mask right now for my safety. And let's get to it. All you need is the CelluClay powder, a large mixing bowl, and a bowl to put your mix into. My voice will be a little bit muffled because I'm wearing a mask, but for my protection and yours, I recommend you also wear a mask. I also have some hot water here. That is not hot enough to burn me. So the hotness of the water makes it much easier, much faster to moisturize all this powder. So I'm not going to measure in actual measurements. I'm going to go in parts instead. So let's start with, since I want to make a big batch here, I'll give you my recipe, my foundation recipe. Then we can adapt from that, depending on what we need. 2 parts powder for 1 part water. And that's probably going to be too liquid at first. That's great if you want something that's going to be organic and give you a lot of textures that are unpredictable a little bit. Then from that mix, you add more powder, you incorporate it, and you get into a firmer consistency that will behave like clay. So let's go with that. So 2 cups, or in this case 2 parts. I'll just fill my container twice, loosely. The powder has already been decrumpled a bit, like it comes really compacted in a package. So 1. Again, I'm wearing a mask, so the dust cloud that I see makes me constrict my voice out of reflex. Can't really fight it. It's an old reflex of mine. Because I was sick once from plaster powders and stuff like that. So when my hands are dry, which they are right now, and when there's powders around, my voice constricts a lot. So don't worry about me. I'm fine right now. So 2 parts powder, and then 1 part hot water that's not hot enough to burn me. This is when it gets messy. I already spilled on the table. That's my new table. I made this for these kinds of videos and for displaying my work when I'm not filming. So it's exciting to use it for the first time. So the water is in there. I want to make sure I'm not burning myself. It's hot and uncomfortable, but it's not burning me. And that's how I like it, to make sure that I'm doing this really efficiently. I'm gonna get closer to the mic so you can hear it. It's like almost oatmeal. It's a very similar sound to making your own toilet paper pulp, although this is much stronger than toilet paper pulp. It has other things in it, and I can't reveal what they are because I don't know. The company wouldn't tell me, and I understand why. They did say that it was mostly recycled paper fibers. I have been able to reproduce CelluClay in the past by my own experimentation, almost identical, but I figured it was a lot more work than I was willing to do before actually getting to the creation part. So that's why I started buying the CelluClay more often, so that I wouldn't have to make it. It's more economical in time and money. So just making sure everything is really well mixed. Right now it's, an unusable mush if you're trying to get something precise out of it. But this is really important, this step. And you'll see that I'm using my whole hand in a large bowl, so I'm actually moving around a lot, trying to get all that dust in there. And for me, that's a small batch. I usually make more than that. It depends on the project. I'm gonna make a bit more of a batch later on, but I wanted to show you a foundation measurement that I use a lot. So this stuff is now pretty much, there's no lumps in there because of the hot water and the fact that I just mixed really well. Don't be afraid to use your fist. If you have carpal tunnel syndrome or repeated stress injury, you don't have to rush it. Use your whole hand and don't do it too quick. Don't hurt yourself. Now I'm going to grab about a cup again of the CelluClay, and I'm going to start incorporating it into the wet mix. So let's call this the wet mix, and let's call this the dry. So with the dust that's on my hands, I'm going to start incorporating more. I'm going to add, like I said, about a cup or about 1 portion overall at first of this powder, until the whole thing is firm and it doesn't really want to accept any more dust without feeling like it's just about to become crumbly. So that's the thing, you add a little bit at a time. It's almost like making muffins, except that with muffins you don't want to over mix it because it's gonna get too firm, I think, if I remember correctly.
Give me a break. It's been 30 years since I learned to make muffins.
That's right, I need to go back to that. First, I need to get my oven fixed. Right now it only broils. It's already a lot firmer. It's behaving a little bit more like a firm paper pulp, but it's not yet like clay. So we want to add more of that powder a bit, like a pinch at a time. Try to also undo the clumps as you go. And mix a lot every time. You don't want to start adding a whole bunch and not mixing it right, because that's when you get lumps. This is already much better, but it's still not firm enough for me. So sometimes I just bring the bowl over, and that's a good way to limit how much you're adding at a time. I just dip it in there, and then I massage it some more. I like to show different ways of doing this, of getting the same results. Again, make sure you mix really well. And I know it's mixed well when the color is all the same. When there's no marbling. Also make sure to go back into your bowl once in a while and scrape some of that stuff, because you don't want to waste any of it. Now don't worry about this drying out. It's better if you, immediately after mixing, you bring this to the sink and soak that in water for a few minutes to really make that into mud again so it can be scraped off easily. If you let it dry, it will take a few, a bit longer to re-wet the CelluClay into a manageable state. So there you go. I went back to adding a pinch, but maybe I should have just dumped it in the bucket again. So we're still massaging the powder into the dough. Now it's really starting to behave like dough, like a hairy dough, but a dough nonetheless. It's really cool. Now this could be yucky for some people. Respect that. And if you're the yucky person, I mean, if you're the person who's feeling yucky about this, get over it. You have your own brain. You can hack it should you want to use this stuff. Getting your hands messy is part of the experience. Or you could hire someone to mix it for you. Once it's mixed thoroughly, and once it has rested a bit, it won't be as sticky as this. My hands are already accumulating some CelluClay. I will show you later how to scrape that off without hurting yourself. Already we have, maybe we're halfway there. So we got this this dough going. It's a lot firmer. Every time I add more, it gets firmer. That's a trick I learned from years ago. There was another product that is no longer on the market. It's a product from France. It was made mostly out of sawdust, like a really fine flour of wood. And it had some powdered glue in it as well. And somebody was making beautiful puppets out of that stuff. Her name was Marie-Pierre Simard. And she's one of our best puppet makers here in Quebec, Canada. So I asked her, like, how do you make this such detail, such smoothness, such accuracy in your product? Because I use the same and I never get those results. And she says, oh, first you mix it more wet, then you add more powder, which is exactly what I've been doing with CelluClay ever since. I mean, with that product at first and then with CelluClay. I've tried with other products that are about powder-based, and it works. So it just made sense to me to continue to use this strategy. So if you're listening, Marie-Pierre, merci. See, when we share techniques like this, we all benefit because you're not the only one using it. Should you ever lose that memory, then you can ask someone or look it up. The more of us who share it, the better. Because, other people will start using it in a slightly different way. They might discover a whole new approach to it that you never thought about. So then, because you shared, because others like you shared, you get the benefit all over again. They bring different perspectives. Like, complete beginners can teach a master because of one more question. Because of one different way of thinking about things. Because of forcing you to explain in a different way. To accommodate their different way of understanding. So there you go. More powder. I'm feeling close to the consistency that I like. Now, I normally don't do that over this bowl. I should probably go back to my older method. My arms are getting a bit tired from being lifted above like this. So, let's bring this over. Normally, I'd actually punch it in. Not punch, but, you know, press with my fist in there. And I'd be doing this standing up so that my body weight helps me mix. But this sitting position is the best for filming right now. So, considering my camera angles. There you go. Now, at this point, I could stop. The stuff will actually firm up as you let it rest, because the moisture will keep on moving through the fibers, and at least that's what I assume is happening. But if I make this a little bit in advance, like maybe an hour in advance, maybe even half a day, maybe the night before, it just settles, it just firms up a little bit, and it helps with the handling properties. So to finish the job, I'm gonna get some of that powder in again. Now, by letting it rest, I mean put a lid on it. You don't want it to evaporate. You just want that moisture to move around more evenly. So I'll loosely put the lid on for now. I mean, in the future, I'll actually close it properly.
So my hands are now feeling really, really dry. The CelluClay is cracking on them. Now, this could be a resource. You might want to keep this. So let me put some water in this bowl. So for cleanups, I recommend putting this in an empty sink, filling this with water, leaving it in for like 20 minutes, and your CelluClay will melt into a much more manageable mud that you could just, you know, scoop out with a sponge or a scrubbing pad. I recommend coconut fiber or sisal fiber scrubbing pads because you're not introducing microplastics in the waterways. So the lumps on your hands could be kept as a resource. You can make, again, textures with this. You can roll them up into tiny, tiny stones. Now, waste not, want not is the thought behind this. You can just use your fingernails and, you know, rub that out if your nails were clean, of course. Always clean your hands before working with paper mache and during. If you sneeze, go wash your hands, you know. If you're contagious, put a mask on so you don't spittle into your own art projects, especially if you're going to sell them or give them away. So yeah, you might want to keep all this stuff as a texture surface, you know, a debris kind of thing, if that's the kind of thing you want to do. You don't have to. It's just a little bonus tip for you. I don't usually bother with doing the whole thing, you know, like this. It's just another tip that I've used before. Now, what you want to do to clean your hands, you just go to the sink, put the plugger in. Could be a bucket of water if you want, but I like to use hot water and soap. And I just soak my hands in there for 5 minutes or less, you know, until the stuff gets soaked again. It gets manageable. And I don't try to scrape with a brush because that hurts the skin. So what I do is I just get a cloth, a textured cloth, like whatever I used to wash in the shower with. So the fibers, the woven texture, it's like a dishcloth, for example. The same kind of texture as that when they're squarish patterned. Not just the color, I'm talking about the weaving pattern of it. It does grab at the texture and gets rid of it really easily. If it's not hot enough, it might not work as fast. So I like hot water that's not uncomfortably hot, just hot enough to do its job, and a bit of soap, and it really melts away. It's much, much faster to do this than scrubbing from the start, because the scrubbing will just irritate your skin. My skin is really dry today before I even put my hands in the dough, so the moisture was sucked into the mix, of course. So now after this is dry, I'm gonna put on a good kind of natural hand cream, and it's gonna feel awesome again, and my voice will be back to regular levels instead of feeling crackly and dry. I have this effect when my hands are dry. My voice is more like this. So that's how I clean up. Same thing for the table. I might want to use a spray bottle and a sponge and get rid of this stuff before it really, really dries, because then it gets more difficult to re-wet. And yes, CelluClay is re-wettable, and that's an advantage. because you can go back and sharpen some details. You can buff it until it's smooth and shiny. I'll show that later. I just wanted you to know that it's a total possibility to clean this completely. So keep that in mind. Same thing for your tools. This is a stainless steel tool that I made fatter with some Warbler. Here's a bonus tip for you. You can make your tools more ergonomic and fit your hand better with some thermoplastic. So Warbler, the natural color of Warbler, the original formula, Warbler's finest art. They got Warbler black, if you prefer black, but I figured this one is stronger. I mean, I use the black for handles on puppets and stuff because I like the look of it, and it's easy and fast. But in terms of strength, I find the tan-colored version stronger, more durable. It does require more heat, more time with the heat to shape, to become shapeable. But it's a good, comfortable handle, and it handles water very well. I've actually made some submersible puppets, to be performed in a water tank. They were made mostly of Warbler and string. So I know this stuff absorbs a tiny bit of moisture, but it doesn't damage it over time unless you really leave it in there for probably years. Don't do that. But if I'm just going to soak my tool in the same bucket that's being cleaned, then when the whole thing is melted, so has the stuff on my tool. It's going to be so much easier to wipe off. If you want to wipe it off quicker while it's still dry, you got to use a knife, which is really going to scratch your tool. And for a sculpting tool, I prefer to keep it really smooth because I use it for clay as well as CelluClay and other materials. So just put all your tools, all your bowls together, in the sink, fill that with water, let it rest for 20 minutes, something like that. Could be less depending on the conditions and the heat levels, and then you just wipe it off and dry it. These are my kitchen bowls, and I'm not afraid to use them again for food because I only use them for mixing CelluClay, which is non-toxic. So that's how the whole process is to mix a batch. Again, I recommend letting it rest a bit before you use it. I know I've been a bit vague about measurements and time units, but you'll have to feel it for yourself. What are your preferences based on what your habits are, what your abilities are? For me, I like to do it in advance, but I'm not going to frown too much if I have to do it right away and use it right away. It's still going to work. It's just not going to be as easy to detail. Before I leave you for the week, I want to recommend one more thing. If you made too much CelluClay, you can keep it in the refrigerator for months at a time. Although I would much prefer you use it right away. Let's see your results faster, But yeah, if you have to, you can store it in the fridge. The problem with that is it will affect the handling and sculpting properties of the product. So it takes a bit of work to restore it to a working consistency. But in my own personal experience and opinion, it's never the same after you refrigerated it. So here's how to restore it. You add a bit of hot water, just like you're mixing a new batch, but this time you're using the batch that's already done. Just add a tiny bit of very hot water. In that case, you probably want to use a spoon, not your hands. Don't burn yourself. And you're probably going to add too much water at first, so you'll probably have to add a bit more of that powder in the same way as we did in the second stage of the mix. So to me, that's a bit too much work to get it to a working consistency, so I keep that batch for future first coats when they don't need to be so precise, or for organic texture such as rock or ground or mutant flesh, things like that. So yeah, there's a huge difference for me in the feeling and the refinement of it once it's been refrigerated. Now, you can keep your CelluClay outside of a refrigerator for several days or not, depending on your weather conditions, how your air quality is, how clean your containers were. There's a lot of factors you'll have to allow for or adapt to. I have a batch here of the CelluClay from last week when I filmed this episode, and it's no longer usable because we had a heat wave of 3 days. No, so I probably should have saved that batch in the fridge, but I wanted to see how long I could make it last. So because it smells a bit moldy, it still looks fine, but my nose is very sensitive to mold, so I know there's a mold developing in there. I'm not going to take a chance with that. Some people might say spray that with a little bit of bleach and it will be fine. I don't trust that, and I don't like the smell of bleach. I don't like what it does to my skin when I handle it, so I'm not going to risk my health by using bleach or any other product like that. I'm just going to put it in the compost and make a new batch after washing my container really, really well. So leave your comments and questions in the comment section. If you want to know more about paper mache from all over the world, please join us. There's a group on Facebook called Paper Mache Art. There's thousands of us of different backgrounds, different interests, different favorite topics, and we learn from each other. It's very, very friendly. Great place to share your results, your work in progress, your mistakes, and we can help each other learn better. I've been sharing my techniques there for years, and I'll be happy to participate in conversations whenever I see them. So thank you for watching. Next week, we're going to learn how to apply CelluClay to different surfaces and also how to use it as a sculpting medium. So it's good for texturing and it's good for sculpting as well. Thank you. Happy creating.